Hello and welcome to the Frans van Kat interview. I'm Annette Young. So when it comes to handing out money in terms of giving aid, just who is the world's biggest donor? You might think, in fact you might be forgiven in thinking, it's the United States. But actually, in fact, it's the European Union. In the last year alone, the EU has given somewhere in the order of 700 million euros to the Horn of Africa and another 150 million euros to Libya. But given the Eurozone is facing a titanic debt crisis, can they afford to keep giving? With me in the studio today is Kristalina Georgieva, the European Commissioner for International Cooperation and Humanitarian Aid. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Firstly, let's start with the Eurozone crisis, with literally every European government now in slash and burn mode. Is the EU able to keep up with all of its humanitarian aid programs?
It is a credit to our citizens that they, despite of hardship at home, remain very committed to help people in most dire need around the world. We did a public opinion survey. 4 out of 5 Europeans want us to be a force for good when people suffer. And we walk our own talk. As you said, in the crisis in the Horn of Africa, Europe came as the most forceful source of aid. Can we sustain that? What I think is right to ask, can we not sustain it? And the answer is no. We, of course, have to continue to be a source of solidarity. It is morally the right thing to do. Our citizens want us to do it. But it is also an investment in our own future, because instability breeds violence, and violence knows no boundaries.
But the problem is, you know, as you say, it could be that the public sentiment supports the notion of giving aid, but the reality is that governments across Europe at the moment are looking to cut wherever they can, and the first thing they often look at is their foreign aid expenditure.
I must give an evidence of continuous strong support from the European governments for humanitarian aid. I think in the face of the most dramatic tragedies people encounter, either as a result of force of nature or because of conflicts, that brings the best out of people, and people in government also have hearts, and they open their hearts, we open our wallets as well. What is important to recognize is that today, in our huge economic difficulties, we take action to bail banks. It costs a lot. The action we take to save lives costs so much less, and yet it has such a tremendous significance for the standing of Europe and for stability in the world.
But do politicians understand that?
When I talk to politicians in Europe, my take is yes. In fact, I am very positively surprised that from the right, from the left, from the center, there is enormous support for humanitarian action. And it goes to a simple reality that in Europe, because of our own painful history, we have built this value of solidarity. And when we face any place on the planet tragedy, we act, and we respond very generously. And again, the price of this action in comparison for the good we do is so low. Last year alone, let me give you one example. In the European Commission last year, we have provided 1.1 billion euros in support for humanitarian activities from Haiti to Pakistan to Sudan. With this money, we have touched the lives of 140 million people. Just imagine what it means for them, for kids that leave rather than starve and die. And what it means in terms of how Europe is perceived. It is a value for Europe that we must protect. And for that, my commitment is to be very, very strongly accountable to our taxpayers for what we do.
Okay, well, let's start looking at some of the specific examples of where the EU has been spending a lot of its euros in the last 12 months. And one, of course, is Libya. Are you confident that the country's new rulers are spending that aid money wisely?
In humanitarian affairs, we actually never give money to governments. What we do is we reach to the people affected in the shortest possible route, and that is through humanitarian organizations and the United Nations system. So when we provide help, it is food and water and healthcare and shelter that goes straight to those who most need it. It does not take the route through government. So in this sense, there is no reason for us to be worried for our assistance.
But are there logistical problems that have emerged, given all the enormous problems that Libya is now facing with the ousting of Gaddafi and a new government seeking control?
Well, humanitarian workers don't have an easy job. They actually have one of the riskiest jobs in the world. Last year, more humanitarian workers died or were kidnapped than UN peacekeepers. So they know how to operate in very difficult circumstances. They're usually the first to come when a disaster or conflict erupts, and they are the last to leave when everything is done. Then we go. But in Libya, let me just go through what we do in Libya, so it makes sense to our viewers. What we do in Libya today are three things. First, clean up the mines and the booby traps that have been set during the conflict, and also try to get kids alerted to loose arms. Don't play with a grenade. Second, alert the new authorities of what is it that they take as responsibility to international humanitarian law. Very simple. Don't kill civilians, respect the rights of people, protect the sub-Saharan Africans there. And three, there is still some shooting, and the medical system of Libya is not entirely up to par. Make sure it functions.
Let me just come back to point number 2, and that is human rights abuses. And the NTC and a number of its fighters are facing allegations of such. Are you worried that this is something which is not being dealt with by the country's new government?
In the humanitarian community, we take a very strong stand on impunity, because if there is no justice, then there will be revenge and there will be more humanitarian suffering. So we advocate very strongly for the new authorities there to not turn a blind eye to any abuse, never mind who caused it. And the way we do that is by putting out a strong voice with our foreign affairs ministers, so they can be those to stand for the victims of the conflict.
Now, with the Horn of Africa, the EU spent 700 million euros alone. I mean, it's a desperate situation which is having a massive spillover effect, affecting not only countries in Africa itself, but elsewhere, isn't it? And I mean, is the EU doing enough in terms of offering aid?
We have been there with the first signs of a problem, even before the UN was to announce a famine in Somalia. And we do a lot. Our help is reaching out to some 10, 11 million people in the affected countries in Somalia, but also in Kenya, in Ethiopia, in Djibouti. We also look at the spillover of this crisis beyond the Horn of Africa.
Because Yemen,
Yemen. You know, what is going to happen is in the next 6 months are going to be very difficult. We will have to focus on the most immediate victims of the hunger. But then we would be left with camps in Kenya, in Ethiopia, and in Yemen, a very vulnerable country, not very well known, that there are over 200,000 Somalis in Yemen. And in August, September, October, 2,000-3,000 people will cross the border in a country that is overburdened with problems of its own. So we also have to help the Yemeni to handle the Somali problem.
Finally, and just coming back to the fact that the EU is the world's largest donor, but the fact of the matter is, it's not viewed as such. I mean, the Americans have a much greater visibility, don't they? How do you correct that?
You know, the European people are more humble people. We don't like to go around and brag about what we do. But in these harsh times, we actually have to be much more forthcoming for our citizens to tell them the good stories that their money secure around the world. And the way we correct it is in doing two things. The first one is I have a team mostly in the hotspots of the planet, of my own staff. They are the eyes and ears of our taxpayers. They have a responsibility not only to do a good job, but to tell the stories back home. And two, I am now much more insistent with our partners, with UN, with the humanitarian community, give credit where credit is due. Help me to help you for your work in the future. So you will see more often the European flag waving where we help the victims of natural disasters and conflicts.
I'm afraid, Kristalina Georgieva, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for being with us today. And that's it for this edition of the Frans van Kat interview. Stay tuned for more news and headlines, which are coming up very shortly. Sorry.